Thank you. Thank you.
Hello, we're doing welfare. Sorry that it took so long. All right, so my topic was housing welfare. Now, welfare has two meanings because, of course, it does. It's English. The first one is the health and fortunes of a person or a group, and the second version that we're going to be talking about is financial support given to people in need. This could stem from any of the following down here: food stamps, Medicare, housing assistance, social security, disability programs, some of which I know you guys are familiar with. But what about housing specifically? So this pays for the room and board of elder adults or adults with disabilities who can't live on their own, who have lower incomes. The threshold is usually around 30 to 50% of the median income. The Department of Housing and Urban Development is the ones who decide that. And the amount of people, their goal is to reduce the amount of people living within institutions or being homeless. The historical significance of some of these, I have a few examples here, but there is a lot more. So the National Housing Act of 1934 was a response to the Great Depression, and it was to compensate for the New Deal programs. Previously, housing insecurity had existed before this plan was put into action. President Roosevelt signed the act, and the main purpose of the law was to encourage improvement in housing standards and conditions to provide a system of mutual mortgage insurance. And for the purposes, the law created the Federal Housing Administration, or FHA, and they do help has helped 44 million homeowners and has financed more than 50,000 multi-family mortgages. Yeah, sorry. The next one is United States Housing Act of 1937. This was the most significant law implication for federal subsidies, and this was for the elimination of unsafe and unsanitary housing conditions and the eradication of slums, and they were hoping for decent living conditions everywhere. And the model shifted the federal government away from construction projects and more towards what they already had. For the next two, it tackles GI Bill, which was for specifically veterans, and unfortunately, as we know, there was very racist sort of practices put in, and unfortunately, Black veterans did not get all of the benefits. But about two decades after the Fair Housing Act of 1968, President Lyndon B. Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act, and it came about a week after Mr. King's assassination, and thus protected buyers of houses against discriminations for buying a home. The issue with housing welfare, one of the big ones is gentrification. This is the practice of wealthy people moving into more low income or working class urban communities for low rent. And this has multiple different sort of benefits and downsides. For one, gentrification divides cities into rich and poor areas, advantage or disadvantages. So thinking of downtown, here's the area that you want to go, here's the area that you want to avoid, that kind of thing. It also displaces low income working class residents. These families are usually forced into low income neighborhoods to find affordable housing in the already affordable housing areas that they were in. They're being pushed out. And then another large factor of this is the shortage of land. So about 30% of Europe is land. Most of the open land is used for farming, and most of densely populated areas, as we already know, are sort of unsafe, meaning that there are issues of where to build the houses themselves. The next one is lending and crafting. Crafting brand new houses takes a lot of financial tying up, and for most businesses or maybe people of high income, it's not very enticing for them to tie up so much money. So the amount of people willing to do so is very small. Labor and materials, there are a lot of things that go into building a house, especially when it comes to materials. As we know from COVID, it was very hard to get anything because the supply chain slowed down. And that also leads to labor, as there was a lot of people who were out of work and that kind of stuff. In order to procure the amount needed for all of these houses, it would take a very large effort, and the ramifications would just be way too much. The world needs to build a lot of houses, 96,000 new affordable homes every day to accommodate for the 3 billion people who are most likely going to be on this earth by 2030. So we'll be on our way. So the possible policies that I came up with was UBI, Universal Basic Income, which is essentially a government program in which every adult citizen receives a certain amount of money regularly. It's about $12,000 just to stay above the poverty line. So this would help with essentially anything that they would need, including housing. The downside is that it's highly expensive. There's a high possibility of making the wealth gap larger, especially considering that this is supposed to accommodate all adults. There's inflationary concerns, and there needs to be a transfer of wealth from somewhere. Housing choice vouchers, the federal government's major program for assisting very low income families, the elderly and disabled to afford decent and sanitary housing. The downside is there are a lot of highly specific requirements in order to qualify, and the federal government controls essentially all of it. So it's a little bit of a tie-in for the tenants who are participating in this program. And then a boost to Social Security through budget cuts in high spending areas. This, of course, has been covered before. We spend way too much for military. We spend way too much for this and that. If we were to cut down on those a little bit, we would be able to provide for these new programs. So the decision, it really depends on where you're going to. It depends on where you're going to do this. Like, what area are you trying to urbanize? What kind of housing are you going to give? Is it going to be multiple apartments, that kind of thing? So it's really just subjective and left up to interpretation.
All right. So for my subtopic, I chose to cover unemployment. I chose it for personal reasons because currently my mom is actually unemployed, so I figured I could ask her what her experiences have been. So try to turn her around and look over this for me. So here's the current unemployment data. So the current U.S. unemployment rate, and this is the national rate, is 3.7% as of October of 2022. It is up, but only barely. And the average unemployment rate is around 3 to 5%. You can see it fluctuating from the night we started recording around the post-war era. So around 45 is when data actually was officially collected. But there's a lot of other times where you probably can get reasonably estimate the unemployment rate, such as during the Great Depression. But you can see it's been higher and lower. You can see the big jump in 2020 due to COVID, and you can see it's been brought way down since then. Some causes of unemployment. There's 3 main causes of unemployment. There's frictional unemployment, which is temporary transferring between jobs, where workers search for better pay or looking for jobs that actually match their skills. It also reflects new or returning workers returning to the workforce. So if you're graduating college or high school and are just joining the workforce, that's where those people would go into as well. Then there's structural employment, where there's discrepancy between the workers and the jobs. So if you have, for example, say a lot of jobs that require computer science skills, or rather a lot of people with computer science skills, but not enough computer science jobs, there's going to be a lot of unemployed people because there's not going to be enough jobs for everyone. So that's structural unemployment. And then there's cyclical unemployment. where if there's, where people have less capital to spend, there's going to be less revenue going into businesses, so businesses cut jobs, and without jobs, people have less capital, and it's what's called cyclical because it just keeps going down and down until someone intervenes, usually the government, but other organizations can intervene to sort of prevent that from continuing on and on. So that can get out of hand very quickly. Yeah. So unemployment and COVID. So throughout the COVID pandemic, there were a huge spike in unemployment, and there were several government in order to try to mitigate this. So two of the main ones are the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, or the FFCRA, and the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security, or CARES Act. Both were done within about 2 weeks of each other, both under the Trump administration, which provided unemployment relief and extended unemployment benefits for those still suffering from that. But then recently there was, slightly more recently, there was the American Rescue Plan, which was put forth during the Biden early years of the Biden administration, which also continued the benefits up until September of 2022, where all the pandemic era benefits ended. So there's several types of solutions that's been used in the past. One of them is monetary policy, which is lowering interest rate and economic stimulus packages like the stimulus check. I assume many of you either know someone or received one yourself, depending on how old you are. Or, yeah, so getting stimulus money from the government in order to help stimulate the economy helps to keep people in jobs for like the cyclical reason where you don't have capital, jobs will eventually get lost. So keeping the money going keeps jobs in place. Another one is fiscal policy, where government provides tax cuts to businesses in order to potentially help keep jobs by reducing taxes businesses have to spend. Also increasing government spending also helps in this area too, again, just to keep businesses afloat. And then another one is unemployment compensation, which is also known as unemployment insurance. It provides partial income, usually around half or around that number, around that half of your current salary or former salary, for either a defined length of time or until work can be found. But usually it's mainly defined length of time, usually a couple weeks. From my research, it was about 10 to 12 weeks is around typical, but it can vary depending on who you are and your situation. Cost will increase government spending, which can be a lot for some people, but money makes a lot of things go around, so sometimes you just need more money. It does increase inflation. If there's more money in circulation, there's going to be some increase in inflation, which was so people often worry if there's too much government influence, too much extra stimulus, it could lead to inflation in the economy. And also, if there's obviously if there's not enough people in the